Hi students, we are into the last poem of the collection, Landscape of the Capibaribe River. The poem is written by a well-known Brazilian poet, João Cabral de Neto. Cabral is regarded as a master of evocative poetry. Other alternate terms for evocative poetry are visual poetry or concrete poetry. Poets who use these as a poetic device makes use of images that demonstrate emotions and ideas. And meaning is usually conveyed through visual means, using patterns of words and letters, known as typographical devices. Usually, such poems abound in striking visual images. And Cabral is a master craftsman in this regard. He said, "There can be no poetry without visual perception." So he regarded writing as a conscious art. And the poem Landscape of the Capibaribe River is a fine example for this kind of poetry. Capibaribe River is a 240 kilometers river that runs through the Brazilian state of Pernambuco, well known for its sugar plantations. The theme of the poem centers around environmental degradation. Though specifically he speaks about his own state and his own or his native river, it can be applied to almost all nations and rivers facing such a crisis. The poet in the opening lines employs a casual tone. I will read it out. The city is crossed by the river, as a street is crossed by a dog, a piece of fruit by a sword. The poem begins with an analogy. The river crosses the city as carelessly as a dog crosses a street. He introduces the image of the dog, which is central to the meaning of the poem. The river is forced to run through ways or paths ordered by men. Usually their selfish interests obstruct the path of the smooth flow of the river. So the river is supposed to cross the street carelessly as a dog crosses the street. So it is so unnatural as cutting a fruit with a sword, not with a knife. So the senseless and careless way of man's intervention in the nature's scheme of things is highlighted. So the opening lines are critical of the lack of concern for the river and for nature itself. The city is crossed by the river as a street is crossed by a dog, a piece of fruit by a sword. The river called to mind a dog's docile tongue or a dog's sad belly, or that other river which is a dry, wet cloth of a dog's two eyes. Next, through a series of images of the dog, the life of the river is recorded. The river called to mind, brought up to my mind, a dog's docile tongue. Docile, the word docile means submissive or ready to accept control, ever yielding, So a dog and the river are docile. They are at the mercy of their masters. They have sad bellies. So striking images, one by one. Are clustered together. The images here show how they submit themselves to the greediness of man. Human beings are always stumbling blocks to the natural flow of the river. By their careless use of rivers, they pollute the river. So this kind of an idea is carried on through a number of such images. For that matter, any river is polluted and turns a slave to man. So rivers are like the dirty wet cloth spread over the dog's eyes. The dog or the river is a mute witness to the dirtying process. So it is an unpleasant sight. The river is like a dog without feathers. Those two lines are very striking. The comparison between the river and the dog. A dog without feathers, a river without feathers, all these are strange expressions. So it brings into our mind an ordinary dog or an ordinary river as polluted as it could be. And an ordinary dog which is mistreated, starving, and miserable. Incidentally, A Dog Without Feathers is the title of one of his poems, and almost the same image is also expressed in the other poem. The river here is totally under the control of the humans. So it knew that word rose, I think this is an error, just strike it off. It knew nothing of the blue rain. It knew nothing of the rose-colored fountain, so you have to read it like that. It knew nothing of the water in a water glass, of the water in pitchers, of the fish in the water, of the breeze on the water. The river does not or know anything about such pure stuff. All these things which are catalogued are images of relative purity. And the river doesn't have any idea about all these. It doesn't know of the blue rain, rose-colored fountain, water in a water glass, water in pitchers, fish in the water, or the breeze on the water. So the acts, the human act of exploitation disrupt the natural flow of the river. In the next stanza, the poet turns to another set of images to list what the river knows. Earlier, images of relative purity were given, but the river does not know about it. But here, a list of impurities is given, and the fish only knows these impurities. It knew the crabs of mud and rust. Crabs of mud, of rust. It knew silt. Silt is the sediment of mud or clay found on the riverbed. So all these are impurities. And the silt is compared to a sheet of mucous membrane. If there is excessive discharge of mucus, it has to be flushed out. But the river also carry only silt. It must have known the octopus. It must have known the octopus. That means earlier there was greater biological diversity. Now even octopus is missing. And surely knew the feverish women living in oysters. And the river is used to be manipulated, exploited by excited women entering it and gathering oysters for commercial purposes. The river never opens up to fish. Now, in many of the remaining stanzas, the poet makes analogies between the river and the human beings. The river never opens up to fish. The river, in its dirt, never gives space or accommodates the fish with its freshness and a natural dislike of the knife of the human being. Human beings gather their fish and then with the help of the knife cut it into pieces. So a fresh snake with their natural instincts of being hurt by the knife cannot live in this dirty river. So the river doesn't give space to the fresh fish never opens up to fish, to the shimmer, to the knifely unrest. Unrest maybe, the violence with the knife existing in fish. It never opens up in fish. So very assertively, the poet makes that remark. It opens up in flowers, but flowers can bloom there. But we'll be shocked to find what sort of flowers. Poor and black, like black men and women. It opens up into a flora as squalid and beggarly as the blacks who must beg. So the flowers bloom there, but what kind of flowers? Poor, black. So a kind of negative picture about the flowers blooming is presented before us. Poor, black, squalid, beggarly, all these epithets convey a negative meaning. Then it is like the black. It is like the black men and women. Blacks are usually the marginalized lot. So it gives space to flowers to bloom, but it doesn't spread fragrance. But the flowering process is described as poor, black, like black people who are always regarded as the deprived lot. It opens up into a flora. The plant life in a particular region is called flora. It opens up into a flora as squalid and beggarly. The squalid, the word dirty and unpleasant, maybe as a result of poverty or neglect, and beggarly as the blacks who must beg. So the images of the blacks, black people, the hard life they have to lead is compared to the flowering process. So both of them are described in a negative manner. So all the plants come up dirty and unpleasant as a result of neglect, like the poor and deprived blacks. It opens up in hard-leaved mangroves, kinky as a black man's hair. So that the blackness, the color image continues here. The poet presents a series of images, like that of the river opening up in mangroves, a kind of robust plants and trees, kinky or strange like the black man's hair. Kinky means strange, or frizzy or offbeat. And smooth like the belly of a pregnant dog. The river swells without ever bursting. Like the belly of a pregnant dog, the river swells. And in the river's childbirth, like the dog's delivery, all the fluid pours out with the invertebrate. The river swells without ever bursting. The river's childbirth is like a dog's. So the earlier comparison continues here. Fluid and invertebrate. Really, dog is a vertebrate mammal. A vertebrate mammal. Invertebrate means animals without backbones are called invertebrates. So it's the young one, the infant really, or when it is born, it looks like an invertebrate. And I never saw it seethe as bread when rising seethers. in silence. The river bears its blotting poverty, pregnant with black earth. So all these evoke images of negativity. The birth of a dog, the fluid pouring out, but the invertebrate creature looking like a vertebrate. The river swelling like the belly of a dog. So all these processes are undertaken in silence. And never I saw it moving or boiling as bread when rising seethers. So that submissive nature of the dog is again emphasized. So it bears everything in silence. All these processes described are undertaken in silence. It bears all the pollutants entering into in silence. All the pollutants making the river pregnant are born in silence. The river bears it in silence. The river bears its bloating poverty, increasing, swelling poverty, pregnant with the black earth. So again the image, the black. It yields in silence, in black earthen capes, in black earthen boots or gloves, for the foot or hand that plunges in. How people destroy the river. The men wear boots and gloves, and then they enter the river to rob its wealth, to pollute it. And destruction is being done by these men and women, by the human beings in general. In the next stanza also, the stagnation of the river, the destruction of the river is again repeated through a fresh series of fresh symbols. As sometimes happens with dogs, the river seemed to stagnate. Stagnate means to cease to flow or remain immobile. Seemed to stagnate, its waters would turn thicker and warmer, flowing with the thick warm waves of a snake. So a cluster of images, through a cluster of such images of the dog, the snake, the poet points to the stagnation of the river. The waters grow thicker and warmer, and the river starts moving sluggishly. The movement is tired, lazy, and slow, like the movement of a sluggish snake. So it is moving towards stagnation. The river, by its very nature, suggests flow. And the river is alive insofar as it flows. But when the river becomes stagnant, it means, or it suggests its own death. So the river trudging through suggests laboriousness and lack of ease. The river, with its dirt, with its silt, is dying. It had something of a crazy man's stagnation, something of the stagnation of hospitals, prisons, asylums of the dirty and smothered life, dirty, smothering laundry it trudged through. It trudges, it moves along through very tiredly. It moves along, and it's like the stagnation of the river is like a crazy man's stagnation. A crazy man sometimes he remains motionless. He keeps himself immobile, stays somewhere and fixes his look on something and stays over there. Then something of the stagnation of hospitals, prisons, asylums. Maybe the stagnation of the river is extended into the human world. It's stagnant like a crazy man. It also reflects the stagnation of the hospitals, asylums, maybe mental asylums, and the sugar factories pouring out the effluents, the waste. So all the industries, all these establishments listed, may they pour out the waste materials into the river, and thus the river remains or gets pregnant with dirt and silt. Of the dirty and smothered life. So when it swells with dirt, it's leading a smothered life. It finds it difficult to breathe. So it gets suffocated, smothered life, dirty, smothering laundry, that we call it suffocating waste, filled with waste. The river cannot move, cannot breathe properly, and it trudges, it moves along towards stagnation. Trudge means to walk slowly with heavy steps. So the image is very clear. The destruction of the river is put in various kinds of images. Something of the stagnation of decayed palaces, eaten by mold and mistletoe. Something of the stagnation of obese trees, dripping 1,000 sugars from the Pernambuco dining rooms it trudged through. Again, the decay images of decay continue. The whole area of the Pernambuco, I told you it's a state in Brazil with many sugar plantations, sugar factories, and all these throw out the waste into the river. So the whole area is also decayed in one sense, because they are inhabited by the sick, the uncultured residents. Though they have material wealth, they live in palaces and luxurious apartments maybe, but they are not dignified enough to treat the river in a decent manner. So, eaten by mold and mistletoe. So they are parasitic plants. Decayed palaces eaten by mold and mistletoe. Maybe these palaces, these grey palatial houses are unattended, left untidy. Something of the stagnation of obese trees. Maybe people are excessively fat, dripping 1,000 sugars from the Pernambuco. All these, the waste materials, the effluents of these sugar factories and Pernambuco dining rooms, living in luxurious houses, in vast spaces, but their minds are narrow, they are uncultured. It is there with their backs to the river that the city's cultured families brood over the fast eggs of their crows. In the complete peace of their kitchen, they viciously stir the pots of sticky indolence. The people with their backs to the river, that itself shows how they send out the waste into the river. And they are backs to the backs to the river. They are negligent of the dying river. They cannot save the river. So that the city's cultured families brood over the fast eggs of their crows. I think there is a mistake there of the crows. That word crows doesn't fit into the matter there. So even without that, we can get a contextual meaning. They brood or think over the fast eggs. They are thinking over their life, their material life. Maybe they are thinking of their own existence. The so-called, put in quotations, cultural families. They are not cultured really. And in the complete peace of the kitchens, they viciously stir the pots. They are forced into the kitchens, and they hesitatingly enter the kitchen. They stir the pot viciously. So they are lazy women who are forced to go into the kitchen very hesitantly, of sticky indolence. Indolence is laziness. So no one is bothered about the dying river, and no one has any scheme of, no one has any plan to save the river from such a kind of degeneration. And now we come to the last two stanzas. And the poem ends with a series of questions about the fate of the river. Could the river's water be the fruit of some trees? Why did it seem like ripened water? Why the flies always above it, as if about to land? Did any part of the river ever cascade in joy? Was it ever anywhere a song or fountain? Why then were its eyes painted blue on maps? So, negligent of the dying river, the so-called cultured people think about their life, their existence. With an agitated mind, Cabral undertakes an act of finding fault with the man's lack of concern for this state of affairs. Then, in the images of human beings with their back to the river and of the thick, ripened water and the flies that hover over the river, the poet draws attention to the unhealthy state of water. Could the river's water be the fruit of some trees? Why did it seem like ripened water, very heavy water, muddied and filled with filth? Why the flies always above it as if about to land? The flies which hover around any waste material, about to land on the surface of the water. Then man cannot envisage, or man cannot find out a solution to this problem. They have turned their backs to the river, in a figurative sense. So did any part of the river ever cascade in joy? Cascade means to fall in a rush, the cascading of water from a hilltop. Did any part of the river ever cascade in joy? Rivers are colored blue in maps. So the poet naturally asks some questions. Did they get a chance? Did the rivers get a chance to cascade in joy? It would have been happy if it cascaded in joy. But pregnant with impurities, how can a river cascade in joy? Was it ever anywhere a song or fountain? Did it sing a song? Or did it become a fountain? All these show the happiness of the river. So no fountain, no cascade in cascading in joy, and not even a song sung by the river. So the rivers are all plunged into gloom, plunged into darkness. Why then were its eyes painted blue on maps? So that's a crucial question. The poem ends with a series of questions. Rivers are colored blue in maps. We find the sea, ocean, and the rivers all are blue in color. So they must have been pure and blue earlier on. But somewhere in its course, they must have sung songs, they must have joined the fountain, or they would have cascaded in joy. At that time, it was justified that the rivers were painted blue. But now the rivers have lost the beauty, the purity, and they are no longer blue. Thick with silt and mud, they have turned brown. We know about the impurities. Pollutants have destroyed them. From the Capibaribe river, Cabral moves to the destruction of the rivers in general. He points to the Capibaribe river in Brazil, but that is applicable to almost all the rivers worldwide. So his argument is that the maps have to be recolored because they have lost the blue color. Then even while the maps retain that blue color, so the maps have to be drawn afresh with a color change. So the suggestion is to record the truth and change the color of the river from blue into brown or black. With this, we end this poem. I think I have finished almost all the poems in this anthology. I have dealt with. I am sending question answers given at the back, given at the end of the text to you. So please go through this. So along with this analysis, keep your books ready, and with this analysis, try to read the notes I have given. And if you need more clarification, you can always contact me. Thank you.